Good afternoon. We are back to the classroom for the 12th lecture on neutrons and probe of condensed matter. Today, this will be the last talk on basics of neutron scattering. Then it will be followed by a module of neutron diffraction, in which magnetic neutron diffraction, powder neutron diffraction, all will be discussed in details and with specific examples and kind of research problems that you can carry on. And after I finish my today's talk, after this module and before the next module starts, uh, there is one lecture on neutron detectors. Neutron detection is a very important part of neutron beam instrumentation, whether we are in a reactor or in a spallation neutron source. And that's why I thought that a brief dedicated session on neutron detectors will be valuable. So with that, let me start this lecture. So I will take you through the whole course material which I have covered till now very quickly. And there have been questions on neutron nucleus interaction. Now, that's a very interesting topic, and I must tell you, this is a very top topic of it's a very topic of interest in nuclear physics, because here we have been talking only about thermal neutrons, but there are neutrons of higher energy, and neutron nuclear interaction has various aspects which have been studied and still being studied by the nuclear physicists. So I'll make very brief comments and I'll bring out some interesting aspects of that. Some of you had asked why some neutron scattering length should be negative. I'll try to address that. That topic itself needs much longer time, but I'll try to at least briefly outline that method by which you can show that a neutron scattering length for thermal neutrons can be negative. With that, let us start the quick tour of what we have been doing till now. So I showed you a reactor and an accelerator source. So as I told you that this reactor is Dhruva reactor in Trombay, India, where you have many neutron scattering facilities, actually 11 spectrometers for various kind of studies, which I discussed in this meeting. And I also mentioned to you about spallation neutron sources, which are the present day sources for neutron scattering. These are pulse neutron sources based on proton accelerators. So to make a proton accelerator source, you should have the expertise of making a proton accelerator of nearly 1 giga electron volt. So that is the primary requirement, but otherwise this source has several attractive features. When I told you I didn't forgot to mention some of these, I'll highlight that. The most important feature is this, that in a spallation neutron source, you don't need any fissile material, any uranium. A high Z target or depleted uranium, that means uranium not 235 but uranium 238 is also equally acceptable. Actually, often tantalum, things like tantalum or zirconium alloys are used as a target because this reaction is not a fission reaction. And a very interesting aspect of it is that this is a subcritical assembly. When it's a subcritical, I must tell you, people who are not in the field of reactor design or reactor physics, who have not studied reactor physics, but I think all of you are familiar with the term criticality of a reactor. A reactor is critical means its multiplication factor is equal to 1. Criticality 1 means the reactor can sustain chain reaction, and that is necessary for a reactor to operate. Whereas a spallation neutron source is not a reactor, it's a subcritical assembly. That means once the proton beam goes, the neutron beam also dies out. It's a very safe assembly. because the reactor is a critical assembly, there are lots of what should I say, design aspects and lots of regulatory aspects which one has to follow to make a reactor work, keep a reactor working. One has to license it because of that. Whereas these aspects are slightly less restrictive in a spallation neutron source because it's a subcritical assembly. Another interesting aspect of this spallation neutron source actually, uh, most of the instruments don't have too many moving parts. Like the spectrometer, the detectors, the samples, the detectors need not move because here we use, as I told you again and again, time of flight spectroscopy. So you use a polychromatic beam, unlike a monochromatic beam in a reactor, and you can do spectroscopy here using polychromatic beam. And since the beam path is not changing, you can have experiments through windows which need not change. If you are changing angles, then the window or a sample environment, for example, the sample is in a cryogen, inside a cryostat, then you need to have windows around the sample which will allow neutron path. These windows are not so restrictive in a spallation neutron source because the paths are fixed, so you can have fixed windows. That is also another advantage. This is about spallation. So I showed you, and then I started with the formalism, which is called Born formalism, Fermi Golden Rule, where I told you again and again that the scattering cross section is given by the uh, Fermi Golden Rule, where the incident plane wave and the outgoing plane wave, between them you have this potential, and this basically comes to a scattering cross section based on the interaction potential between the nucleus and the neutron. In case of thermal neutron, we started with all our discussion started with the assumption that we have a delta function potential, and I justified it that for thermal neutron the wavelength is in angstroms, and the nuclear dimensions are in femtometers, so which is much smaller than the wavelength of the neutron. And so far as a thermal neutron is concerned, I am emphasizing, so far as a thermal neutron is concerned, the nuclear potential is a delta function. And because it's a delta function, so your treatments become much easier. For example, one example what I wrote here is for the delta function potential, this prefactor gives me the scattering cross section at an angle. Next, we derive the scattering length for these neutrons as a function of angle. This is called elastic scattering length, in which I showed that you need to have an average over the ensemble, a term like BL prime complex conjugate BL. And this gave rise to what we saw. It gave rise to something called coherent and incoherent scattering cross section for neutrons. This is new in case of neutrons compared to X-rays, I pointed out, because in case of neutrons, the neutron nucleus interaction depends on the nuclear spin. And nuclear spin, in general, at any temperature, it is difficult to align the nuclear spin, so they are orienting. So with respect to the neutron, the nuclear spin can be either up or down depending on the nuclear spin. So whether it is a polarized neutron beam or an unpolarized neutron beam, it always have this fluctuation from side to side with respect to the neutron nuclear interaction. When you have this fluctuation from side to side, then we talk about an average value, and we talk about the fluctuation around that average value in terms of scattering length. And the average value gives us the coherent scattering cross section, and the fluctuation around the mean gives us the incoherent scattering cross section. And I pointed out to you that when it comes to self correlation, that means a particle, its own position, then it's a delta function. When we do a static approximation, that means nothing is moving. And when we talk about diffraction, where the waves coming from one side interferes with the other side, then we talk about coherent scattering cross section. And both of them coexist in the system. That's why we need to take care of we know that the incoherent scattering cross section does not have any, so far as diffraction is concerned, does not have any angular structure. It's constant value over the entire angle. So the coherent part gives us the diffraction peaks. But these diffraction peaks, I compared them with X-ray diffraction, and I told you, because X-ray diffraction takes place due to interaction between the electron charge cloud and the X-rays, so the extent of the scattering center is large. Whereas in case of neutron scattering, it is between neutron and nucleus interaction, and the scattering center is a delta function. And that translates to the fact that in case of X-rays, we have something known as form factor, which is a Fourier transform over the charge density, and this, the larger the charge density, this form factor falls faster. This schematic shows faster in Q space, and this reduces the intensity of the diffraction peak by a multiplication factor. This is not the case in case of neutrons, because neutrons don't have this form factor because it's a delta function. It does not have an angular variation. So I can say that the neutron form factor is same throughout the angular range, and this is an advantage. Next, I again went back to the basic formula, went to a master formula, and used, basically I should say, quantum mechanics algebra to define something called a time operator, and finally got a result which showed, this is most important. You can forget everything else, but if you remember this part, then for all your experiments, you can go ahead and your basics will be little clearer when you try to plan an experiment. So what I showed actually during all these talks, that your measured intensity is called scattering law. So we probe the system in the q omega space, and that q omega space is basically a double Fourier transform from real space and time. Our desire is to find out how the system behaves in real space and time. All the condensed matter physics questions are here, material scientists. But we start from here in any scattering experiment, and this is a double Fourier transform of this function. So we start from here, we go there instead, and so between these two, depending on the experimental techniques, I said depending on the experimental technique, neutron is not the unique thing over here. There can be X-ray scattering, there can be electron scattering. So any scattering technique which measures SQ omega, there's a modeling involved which takes you back to real space and time, and that gives the answer in terms of dynamics or structure in real space. This I discussed. Then after this discussion, I went, what all things we can do using neutrons, and I mentioned to you that we can do structure and dynamics. When you do structure, we just find out intensity as a function of angle. We don't do any energy analysis. When I try to find out dynamics, then I have to find out what is the energy transfer between the neutron and the scattering system. So I need to measure the difference in energy between the incident energy and the outgoing energy. And all these are becoming more rich because neutron is a tiny magnet, and with all the structure and dynamics work, I can add the magnetic scattering magnetic factor from neutron. So with respect to that, I must say that there are some questions, so I'll try to briefly touch upon this point. So I have been talking about neutron nuclear potential, but there are orbital electrons here. Now there are two parts. These orbital electrons, they have L values, and since it is an orbiting charge particle, there is a magnet. Plus, there is a spin, unpaired spin. So that also has a magnetic moment associated with it. And all these can interact with the neutron. So when I talked about neutron nuclear interaction, it was this that I was considering. But now I have a extended charge cloud, a nucleus. So I have nuclear potential plus I also have a magnetic potential. And this one, it is not a delta function. Certainly not a delta function. This has all the hallmarks of what we talked about form factor in X-rays. This is extended. If the orbital momentum is quenched, then this part is not there, but still an unpaired electron like iron, cobalt, nickel, which are the typical 3D magnetic elements, they have this spin, unpaired spin, and they will interact and they will have their form factor the way X-ray diffraction has that form factor due to the charge cloud. But now this form factor is coming from a shell of electrons in a classical picture. Since it's a shell, this form factor will fall even faster. But we have to talk about now nuclear plus magnetic in case of magnetic neutron diffraction. And with that, we can find out, which is the beauty of these experiments, that the magnetic moment at an atomic site, and that is extremely attractive for research. And then I talked about dynamics. I talked about various time scales of dynamics. You can study phonons at femtosecond time scales. When I say time scale, that means typical 1 by frequency, I would say. Similarly, I can talk about diffusion, and the time scales are much faster. There are some instruments, advanced instruments, where you can study even slower dynamics at 10 to the power minus 9 nanosecond length scale. So these are easier experiments and these are tougher experiments. And then I went ahead and talked to you about the various way we can transport neutrons. I talked to you about guides. I talked to you about various beam lines and what is the justification, like these radial beam lines, tangential beam lines, through tubes. These have less gamma ray flux than this. I discussed all this. I told you that the neutron guide is basically like a neutron, an optical fiber for neutrons. Only optical fibers work on total internal reflection, because in case of neutron the refractive index is less than 1. It works like a optical fiber using total external reflection. That's the difference. Otherwise the principle is the same. I showed you photographs of guides, guide halls, huge guide halls. I told you that these big sources today, whether neutron or X-rays, they look more like industrial setups. These are the guides I showed you, and I told you that you can bend a guide to get a better flux. You can put two large number of guides in a beam path. These are typically, let us say, 2 centimeters. So on a 100 millimeter beam line, I can put 10 millimeter, I can put 3 guides comfortably, and I can take them diverging out and put many number of instruments on that. Then I talked to you about some experimental result. We talked about magnetic neutron diffraction. I showed you results of Rietveld analysis using one of the spectrometers for magnetic structure. This is the name of the compound. I talked about liquid and amorphous systems using large Q diffractions in Dhruva and other places. So this gives me the low R information, or rather, in case of liquid and amorphous systems, the correlations which come between the nearest neighbors, because these are the shells which are well defined in case of liquids and amorphous systems, and as you go away from the central atom, then these shells become more diffuse and you get into average density for a liquid or an amorphous system. So this needs to be done at a higher Q values. We talked about mesoscopic length scales. We talked about small angle neutron scattering experiments where we can see inhomogeneities of size typical nanometers. And we also talked about neutron reflectometry, which is again a technique similar to optical reflectometry, where you can understand the material, its properties in terms of thickness, density, interface roughness, which these all will be discussed in details. Then I went into dynamics and I showed you some results. I described to you a triple axis spectrometer, how it works, and using the triple axis spectrometer, how you can measure phonon dispersion curves in a solid. This is just a result. And then I also showed you some result on quasi-elastic neutron scattering. Quasi-elastic means nearly elastic. It is that zero energy transfer line, the broadening of that, which I showed you, is given by a Lorentzian, and measurement of that Lorentzian width of that Lorentzian allows me to determine d, because the width of the Lorentzian is given by h cross d q square. These I have done, and after that I came to a spallation neutron source. I discussed one or two lectures on spallation neutron source, which are pulse neutron sources, in which time of flight technique is the most desired method of doing scattering experiments. And here, unlike X-rays, unlike reactors, instead of using monochromatic neutron, we use polychromatic neutron. That means we use a band of neutrons, and we use the time of flight of these neutrons to determine what is the Q value. If it is an elastic scattering experiment, it's very simple. We switch on a clock. When the proton beam hits the target, that is the zero time. After that, we stop the clock when, after scattering from the sample, the neutron reaches your detector. So this is the flight path. And by measurement of this time of flight, you can find out what is the Q value. And here, because you are just using a polychromatic beam, there are no movements are involved of any detectors. You obtain the whole diffraction data in the same setting of all the detectors. That's an advantage. With that, I have completed my discussion on, my description of what I have been doing till now. There are questions regarding neutron nucleus interaction. Now I will go slow on this part. I am keeping this whole material on the internet because I don't know up to what details I can discuss this with you, but I will point out some interesting features to you vis-a-vis the neutron nucleus interaction. As I told you, that neutron nucleus interaction, if I go by the nuclear physics community, they are given by Bright-Wigner formula, which shows you the sigma. Of course, you have this length scale xi, which is equivalent to b for our experiments, but you also have this term, which is basically which has got resonance term. By resonance, I mean in case of neutron scattering from nucleus, if you see energy versus cross section, there are specific energies where you have when the neutron energy matches with one of the energy levels in the nucleus, you have these resonances. You have this kind of resonances. But these come typically in the kilo electron volt range. That's why they are not of much interest to us. But people who are working in neutronics of reactor physics and bothered about design of reactors, they have to be very much concerned about these things, and they deal with this. We don't, because we are dealing only with thermal neutrons, so life is slightly simpler, easier for us. And as I told you that these are the resonance energies, these are neutron capture and re-emission and neutron absorption cross section. So in these cases, the models that work actually, that the nucleus absorbs the neutron, forms a compound nucleus, and then re-emits the neutron. Not fission, not always fission. Fission occurs sometimes. It is just absorption and re-emission. And sometimes it completely absorbs. So these are given by these gamma ends, which are the full width at half maxima of these resonant peaks. But when you are very, very away, when you are much, E is much, much less than E gamma, then you can ignore this and you can see that the actually we have the B, which was the B that I defined for our scattering formula, is given by a length scale xi, but there is a resonance correction term. Now, if this width is small and this E gamma is very large, which is typically around kilo electron volt, then we can ignore this term and we can keep working with the B that I talked to you about. But this is just for your information that Bright-Wigner formula is the one which gives you neutron nucleus interaction cross section for all energies. At thermal energy level, you can just work with a coherent potential and work. But if we talk about strong neutron absorbers like gadolinium, cobalt, then we have to bother about these absorption corrections, and they are taken care in a proper manner. But this time I cannot discuss that with you. So now little bit more on this neutron nuclear potential. Now let me say that thermal neutron has an energy of, all of us we have been discussing and we know, around milli electron volts. And the nuclear potential, its depth, the depth is around 40 mega electron volt. So the neutron energy is almost zero vis-a-vis the depth of the nuclear potential. On the other hand, the nuclear wavelength is angstrom, but the width of this peak, it is a nuclear radius, as I told you, femtometer, and this is the mass formula from nuclear physics. So you can put any z value. For example, if I put to the power 1 third, so if I put a equal to 8, it comes to be 2. So it will be 2 into 1.5, nearly 3 femtometers for z equal to 8, right? Z equal to 8. So this is, that means the potential width is nearly zero vis-a-vis the neutron wavelength. So this is for visualization. This is like a well going deep, and how deeper, but very, very narrow. So the neutron, in a classical picture, if you're walking on a road, a neutron walks on this road. If there is a very, very narrow hole which is infinitely deep, you will get disturbed. You might get little troubled by that, but then so how come this hole has come? Then you walk past. So same thing happens with neutron, but now coming to the little more of it, that means when this scatters, there are certain phenomena which we need to bother. So I will start with the easiest description of scattering. So this is for you, this is back to the MSc level scattering cross section. We are aware that if a plane wave comes, gets scattered by a scattering center, a spherical wave goes out. So now psi r, as r goes to infinity, comprises one incident wave plus this is a spherical wave. This is a spherical wave that is going out. So this is this spherical wave. This is a spherical wave. You write 4 pi r square e to the power I k r e to the power minus I k r d3r, you will find the same. This factor comes due to flux retention, and this is the, okay, I will use a more general term. I will use a scattering amplitude f. This is an f, which is a function of theta. This is what we write for a plane wave coming in and a spherical wave being scattering out from a single scatterer. Now let's get back to this. So this is what I wrote here, and scattered flux, you can see, you can immediately write as the scattering cross section. So this is the radius over which it is emanating. What is the radius? This r is the radius of the sphere over which the scattering flux is going out, multiplied by velocity, and then this is the scattered term. So square of that. So 4 pi f square v. So if I divide it by v, I get the scattering amplitude, scattering cross section, and that is 4 pi f square. So this f basically what we wrote as b all throughout our expression. So this is the general expression for the scattered flux from this expression. So now see what properties of this well and what we get. So now I told you that neutron and nucleus is a delta function potential. So that allows me only L equal to 0 scattering, S wave scattering. The term is, if you are familiar, it is called S wave. What it means in a normal parlance, basically, e to the power ikz is a plane wave. I can break it up into spherical waves like this. And all these spherical waves have different impact parameter with respect to the potential. That means you know that when you have target, some target passes by with momentum p, this is the r cross p is the impact parameter, and that is nothing but the angular momentum with respect to the central is the same. So these spherical waves, they have different L values with respect to my scattering center. What I am telling here, that L equal to 0 scattering is allowed. That means it's just paraphrasing the fact that because the neutron and nucleus interaction is short range, only that neutron which goes for a head-on collision with respect to the nuclear potential will be scattered, and that is nothing but which has got impact parameter 0 or L equal to 0, and that is the S wave scattering. So now after stating this is what. So I need a neutron which is going in for a head-on collision. Once I say this, then this e to the power ikz, the plane wave in the z direction, I can write it as e to the power I k dot r, e to the power I k r cos theta. And this is known as breaking up the plane wave into spherical waves. Spherical wave resolution of plane waves. If you have not done it till date, just accept it, because we need this to go ahead, to show you some very interesting features of this neutron nucleus interaction. So this is a spherical wave. And now in this spherical wave, I am telling you that I have only L equal to 0 component. So here, when L equal to 0 in this angular wave, angular momentum resolution of spherical wave, these are Legendre polynomials, and this AL are actually, they'll have Bessel functions. So I'm not writing all those things. I'm just giving you the expression for R0R. This is the expression. And let us start. This is basically, you can see this is sine kr by kr kind of thing. But this is the expression for R0R. And this expression, I would like to substitute here. So what I am doing, I have written down psi r as a plane wave and a spherical outgoing wave from the scatterer, sum of them, and then this e to the power ikz, I want to replace with it and again substitute back to my psi r. And when I write it carefully, so it will be e to the power ikr minus e to the power ikr by twice ikr. I substitute the whole thing over here instead of this, and I get this expression. This is very simple algebra, you can do it. But the physical significance is that in this, you have two paths. You see, this is the part e to the power ikr by r is the one which is going out. So this, with this prefactor, you have this term which is an outgoing spherical wave. And you have a spherical wave, L equal to 0 spherical wave, which is coming in e to the power minus ikr by r. You see, this is e to the power minus ikr by r. So this is coming in, this is going out. So now I use another simple trick. I say this is coming in, this is the factor, this is going out, this is the prefactor. So one incoming and another outgoing spherical wave. So what is the absorption cross section in this system? This is incoming flux minus outgoing flux. So earlier I said 4 pi, if you remember, I used the term 4 pi f square for scattering. Now for absorption I do the same thing. 4 pi I by 2k square, because that was the prefactor here for coming in, minus 4 pi, this is the factor which goes out. So the difference between incoming and outgoing is absorption. And I just do this algebra, what I get is 4 pi by k f1 minus 4 pi f square. Now let me tell you what I assume this scattering amplitude, if this has got a real part and then imaginary part. Why? Because this is the most general part. And why should I bring it here? Reason being, there is a wave which is coming in and there is a wave which is going out. This is not absorption alone, I must tell you that. If1 doesn't mean absorption. I know that when you are writing refractive index for a medium, let us say, we write n equal to, a real part r plus you also put an I delta part which takes care of the absorption, because e to the power minus n r brings this part, nk with the real part, and that absorption part is I delta I dot I in a phase factor goes to an exponentially decaying value. So in the propagation e to the power I nk dot r, I should not write r here. Let me correct it. I should write epsilon here, otherwise it's making a misconception. So I have a real part. So and when I write I nk dot r, epsilon dot r takes care of the propagation, but I delta I into I square goes e to the power minus delta r kind of term. This is the absorption in the medium of the optical wave that is taken care of by this absorption term. But here IF1 is much more rich than that. It is not just absorption term. You see the fun of it. When I calculate the sigma absorption, if I just do the algebra correct here, I can do it and show it to you, but I request you to do it. Basically, here you break it. I will write it down here for you and leave it for you to do. Let me go to the palette and tell you. So F minus, 1 second, let me get the term. F minus I by 2k, this square will come out as F minus I by 2k and its complex conjugate, which is F star plus I by 2k. You multiply it out and simply break open the term. F star will give you mod f square, and the other term, and if you write f equal to f0 plus if1 and f star equal to f0 minus if1, I request you to do the algebra. You will get this result. That sigma absorption equal to 4 pi by k f1, which is the imaginary part of the scattering amplitude, and 4 pi f square is the scattering amplitude. So now if I take it to this side, sigma total is equal to sigma absorption plus sigma scattering, which is 4 pi by k into f1. So that means it is 4 pi by k into imaginary part of the scattering amplitude. This is a quantum mechanical result which is very interesting. This is known in scattering theory as optical theorem. This is, to some of you, it might be reminding you what we did about what we saw as Kramer's chronic relationship when we were doing absorption of plasmons. At least to me, it appears something similar, that the total cross section is given by the imaginary part of the F. And this is one interesting result which I thought I will just share with you. Next comes the reason why B should be sometimes negative. So for that, I need to go back to quantum mechanics and solve the problem for a neutron. Now you see this, for the neutron is passing over this potential, which is basically deeply attractive. So the wave vector here for the neutron is different from the wave vector here. So for the free neutron, we know that the Schrodinger equation is d2 psi dx2 plus k cos psi equal to 0, where k is equal to root 2 a me by h cross square. It is the one-dimensional Schrodinger equation, which is solved in our master's degree. Now, when you try to write it down, so this is the Schrodinger equation outside the sphere, and this should be the same Schrodinger equation is solved, only our, I'm sorry, this bracket due to some problem has come here. It comes together with the potential energy. Now you see the potential is 40 mega electron volt. Energy of the neutron is few milli electron volts. So for all practical purposes, you can forget the E. And this becomes root 2 V by h cross square. And we have another equation d2 psi by dx2 plus k1 square psi, where k1 given by this, So both these equations have the solution in this form, e to the power plus minus ikx, both of them. Now with this solution, if I go ahead and so now the thing is that inside the sphere, when I take combination of e to the power I k1x and e to the power minus I k1x, we can also generate solutions which are cos k1x and sin k1x. So now let us solve the same equation in spherical polar coordinates. In spherical polar coordinates, this is the equation, and we do a transformation of variables. So we define, so that was psi now becomes the radial RL, and not RL, it is R0 actually. We are looking for the L equal to 0 solution. Excuse me. So instead of x now, we get an equation in the R, radius of the sphere, and the solutions are very similar to what I told you earlier, that e to the power plus ik1x, e to the power minus ik1x, or ikx and minus ikx. Now inside the sphere, you remember ur is psi r by r lr by r. So if I take a cos solution, then this solution diverges at the origin of the nucleus. Physically not acceptable. So we take the sine solution. So now psi r, let me talk about ur, which is nothing but r into psi r, which I defined. So when I write it, this is, I am leaving it for you in the internet. I'm on my at the site. You can check this, that r psi r comes to, this is ur, r plus k going to 0 as limit, the scattering amplitude f. Now why k is going to 0 as limit? Because with respect to the nucleus, the neutron has energy 0, so lambda goes to infinity, k goes to 0, and that is what I have written here explicitly. So for me, I am looking for solutions when k is going to 0 for the thermal neutrons. And then inside the excuse me, inside the sphere, I have a solution like this, sign solution. K1 is, if you remember, as I told you, here is K1 is root 2 mv by h square. And at the radius, if R0 is the radius for the nucleus, then at the on the surface it is a sine K1 R0. And when you go outside the nucleus, then it is UR, which is R psi R, which I showed you just now, R plus K going to 0 as limit f. This is my scattering amplitude, which I write as R0 minus A. So now we know this is a simplest trick in quantum mechanics. Whenever we have wave function and a boundary, at the boundary the wave function and its derivative must match. So now I need to match UR on the surface, the solutions inside the nucleus and the solutions outside the nucleus. And when I do that, outside it is R0 minus A, inside it is sine K1 R0, that is for the wave function, and for the derivative, this is it. I divide one by the another and I get the logarithmic solution R0 minus A should be equal to tan K1 R0 upon K1. So I rewrite is A equal to K1 R0 minus tan K1 R0 by K1. Now you can see, depending on the nuclear size and the depth of the potential, if tan K1 R0 is greater than K1 R0, then A will be negative. Well, you can have many questions. One question is, I defined A as negative here. If I define it as positive, then it will be, A will be the opposite of this and then A will be positive. Yes, this is just a convention. I am telling you, most of the nuclei have positive scattering length. If I use this convention, some of them will be negative. I can completely reverse the argument and then also nothing wrong will happen and the physics will continue to be the same. So whenever this happens, then my scattering amplitude will be negative. So average value of 1 by K1 R0, and because there's a tan function, it tells me that approximately 3% of the nuclei will have negative scattering amplitude. But then, as I talked to you, that what is the benefit of saying it is positive or negative? What is the physical difference? And I can reverse the convention. Yes. Let us look at it from a property, physical properties point of view. Then it will be clearer to you. Instead of using just quantum mechanical jargons, let us consider refractive index of a medium. Then it makes sense. Let us say n equal to, for neutron, it is given as the simplest form without absorption. This is the number density, this is the B coherent. Now that means equal to 1 minus delta. It is less than 1. All of us from our school days, we know when n is greater than 1, you have total internal reflection. In this case, because it is 1 minus delta, so it will have total external reflection, just the reverse. So opposite to that, so it will have total external reflection. But if B is negative, then n becomes 1 minus delta. It is more than 1. I go back to this situation, there will be no total external reflection. So then that means I can have a medium reflecting neutrons. If it is less than 1, 1 minus delta, if B coherent is positive, then I will see total external reflection up to some critical angle. Usually in this case, we measure the angle with respect to the surface. So I will have total external reflection. This is physically observable. If I have 1 plus delta, I will not see this, and I will see continuously the reflected beam intensity going down. This is physically observable. So materials which have got negative scattering length will not show total external reflection. Materials which have got refractive index less than 1 will show this nature. This was measured by Fermi and Zinn, and it was seen, for example, for nickel 60, excuse me, 60, this is the case, but for nickel 62, this is the case. You don't have total external reflection. So this is a physical reality which justifies, for some the B is negative, for some the B is positive. And with this, I think I have come to the end of my talk, and I thank you all for your attention. Today's discussion on neutron nucleus interaction, the end part, possibly a little beyond the scope of mine, but I had to do it because there are questions, and now I hope at least partially I have satisfied you. The next module starts from 4th of November, but next lecture is on Monday, 2nd of November. I have told you this is on detectors. After that, the module on diffraction will start, to be taken by Professor S.M. Yusuf. So with this, I'm stopping today, and I'll request you, you can ask me questions, and still you can send me your questions at neutroncourse@gmail.com. But please, I can see somebody is asking questions, so please, can you just see? I could see some questions here. You can read it out. You see, when I say total external reflection, it is in terms of optics. Okay. So when I say it will not show total external reflection, you have to compare it with respect to what you have learned from optics. The neutron, which has got a critical angle, up to critical angle, it gets totally scattered. That means scattering amplitude is 1. When it goes beyond this thing, it slides in. Just the way when light goes out from a denser medium to a rarer medium, it goes like this, right? So it's same thing happens when you go beyond the critical angle. The neutron comes in and starts sliding in, and because there's a refractive index contrast, I'm talking refractive index, a part of it will be reflected from the surface. This is optical property. So the neutron is not lost. Only thing is that in case of B positive, you have an angle up to which, like here, here, because we measure the angle with respect to this. Otherwise, if you measure the angle with respect to this, then beyond a certain angle, the ray comes inside. So this is the critical angle, and beyond the critical angle, it starts going out. Here, just the reverse. Up to a critical angle, it gets reflected totally. Beyond the critical angle, means above the critical angle, it starts coming in, sliding inside the medium. And that's how we get information about the medium, by doing neutron reflectometry. Yes. That's all.